I'm Yeung, host and reporter with CBC Vancouver News.
And I'm Sterritt, CBC reporter and columnist.
This is Unmasking Racism, a CBC virtual town hall on how to dismantle systemic racism against Indigenous, Black, and people of color. To start us off, a look at the issues we're talking about, and a warning, the following images may be disturbing to some.
Racism is alive and well in Canada.
For weeks, all eyes have been on global protests against anti-Black racism and police brutality sparked by the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And it's not just an American problem.
If my friends weren't there filming, I probably wouldn't be here. I'm tired of crying. There needs to be solutions.
I have seen this before and yet not seen the needle move.
But racism is not limited to police violence.
Indigenous, Black, and people of color experience it every single day. And some of us are hurting.
The cop opened my door and pulled me out of the driver's seat by my hair, threw me on the ground with a gun in my face.
I was scared, just the whole thing being handcuffed.
It's in our newsrooms, our businesses, and our community.
If it was non-Native grandfather and granddaughter, I don't think they would have done that.
I didn't realize how angry I was about it.
It's in our justice system, our schools, our workplaces.
I didn't understand how hurtful this is to people who live with discrimination every single day. I've always acknowledged that I come from a place of privilege, but I now need to acknowledge that that comes with a massive blind spot.
I've had friends who are Caucasian who've done this in recent years, and I've had to speak out on it.
To cut your turban off and you look like a Canadian.
When I was growing up, I fought racists. There's a lot of people out there that couldn't do that. They couldn't fight back. They didn't have the ability to do that.
But racism is so normalized, so insidious, some deny that it even exists in Canada. Or if it does, it's an anomaly, and at least we're better than our American counterparts. Well, we are no better.
You don't know a damn thing. Go back to China where you belong.
Emotionally, she's going to have to deal with this assault, which happened.
They're like, look at these people with their f***ing masks. What's wrong with society? You hung, go back to your country.
It didn't matter whether I was wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, I was still going to be targeted.
Going down the road, no one's going to like the Chinese community.
The driver will pull up and give me a look.
It's scary for people, even for myself.
And so it says, kill all.
We have to call out racism. We have to stand united and together and to say that this is not acceptable.
Before we begin, we'd like to recognize and honor that we are on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam people.
And we are so grateful to be here. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 on Listen, Gem, and our social media channels. Tonight, we'll be spending the next 90 minutes listening and learning. We are going to lean into our discomfort and acknowledge our complicity as the public broadcaster.
9 panelists from diverse backgrounds will be joining us virtually, while Lien and I are physically distanced here in our studio. We'll be breaking down the conversation with 3 panelists at a time on 3 topics. We'll be looking at institutional racism, organizational racism, and everyday racism.
Angela and I have questions for our panelists, but we also want to hear from you during this town hall, wherever you may be across BC. So send us your questions in the comments section of our live stream on your local CBC Facebook pages, YouTube and Twitter, or you can always call us in Metro Vancouver at 604-669-3733, toll free across BC at 1-800-825-5950.
We begin by looking at what needs to change within our institutions. Our panelists are Professor Annette Henry with the Faculty of Education and Social Justice. She's also the David Lamb Chair in Multicultural Education. And Sergeant Valerie Spicer is with the Vancouver Police Department's Diversity, Inclusion, and Indigenous Relations section. And finally, Bowen Ma is the NDP MLA for North Vancouver Lonsdale. Welcome to you all.
Thank you so much for having me.
Annette Henry, we're going to start with you. Systemic racism is entrenched in so many of our institutions, from police to education systems to media, including us here at the CBC. However, we often hear from people who are miffed about this, who say, How can this be in a country that is multicultural, that is so inclusive? How do you explain that?
I think people don't really understand what systemic racism is. I think people think of racism as when somebody does, and somebody perhaps calls you a name, or it's something overt. But that's the whole point about systemic racism. It's the way that institutions, that systems work, so that certain people are marginalized, certain people don't get access in the same way, whether we're talking about healthcare, education, or CBC or UBC. And so it creates inequity. And so it's going to be invisible for people, let's just say in the dominant group. For example, we've heard this week François Legault and Brenda Lucky, the RCMP officer, saying that systemic racism didn't exist in the RCMP or in Quebec. People in the privileged group don't always see the ways in which, as I think you said at the top of the show, we are complicit in systemic racism. It's the ways that the norms and the values in society, we have a tacit acceptance of the ways in which society works, unless we are, I don't want to use the word victim, but unless looked at things critically to see where the inequities are.
Annette, thank you for that. You talked there about the RCMP. Brenda Lucky initially said systemic racism does not exist. She did say at one point it does exist. Right now, Sergeant Spicer, we're hearing about a lot of criticism from the public towards the RCMP to the VPD. In fact, the VPD has been at the center of criticism from the public. The VPD has admitted there is systemic racism within it today. If this is true, why are we not seeing these structural changes within the VPD in 2020?
Well, the way I look at the criminal justice system, and the police are within the criminal justice system, we are in a colonialistic system, and that's where systemic racism is rooted in within our society, and specifically towards certain people, the Indigenous people, people of various descents. And so this becomes very problematic to address, because these systems have been in place for centuries, and so to unravel that and to change and to move forward, we do have to do a lot of community engagement. We have to engage in dialogue, we need to listen, and we need to continue to work to improve our system to make the criminal justice system a safe place for everyone.
Indigenous and Black people say discrimination is pervasive within policing despite anti-racism, de-escalation, and cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity training. What further changes does the VPD need to make in order to eradicate systemic racism within the force when clearly training isn't working?
Well, we continue to build our training. We continue to engage with community. We are currently developing new sets of training, working with various organizations. We are in dialogue with numerous Indigenous organizations and with members from Black communities throughout the Lower Mainland to inform our practices and to improve however which way we can. And so we are open to dialogue, and we are open to listening and working with the community to continue to improve those processes. Now, beyond training, as an organization, we are actively engaged in reaching out to community, and my section in particular meets with community on a regular basis to try and build that trust. And as we know, trust is fragile, so we need to continue working towards ensuring that the community feels safe to reach out to us.
Bowen Ma, let's turn to you. Premier John Horgan has said he will review the province's Police Act. How will changing that act, deal with racism and policing and hold police accountable if it continues?
So thank you so much for that question. And it should be noted that we've actually been working on trying to address systemic racism for a while now, since 2017 when our government first formed. In particular, to your directly to your question about policing specifically, some of the laws that we've changed already include strengthening BC's Independent Investigations Office, which independently investigates police-involved incidents that result in serious harm or death, and also introducing new binding standards on police stops to forbid arbitrary stops or ones based on race. Now, in terms of the review on policing, I think that we actually have an opportunity to really fundamentally change policing here in BC. The BC's Police Act is 45 years old, and it is very outdated. We want to modernize the act and bring it in step with our government's approach on issues involving relating to mental health and harm reduction, and review it with a specific focus on systemic racism to see where we can make improvements.
We've heard strong statements being made from politicians across the country when it comes to police violence and racism. We have premiers, though, downplaying the existence of systemic racism. Justin Trudeau is accused of being performative when he took a knee. Both Vancouver City Council and the provincial government lack adequate representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. What does this tell you about the amount of work and the type of work that governments need to do?
Well, there is a ton of work for us to do. I mean, systemic racism has existed within the institutions of Canada since colonialism, and that's 150 plus years worth of systemic racism that we need to address. And it won't be done very quickly. It can't be done, probably not even in one or even a few terms of government. It requires our concerted, continued effort to acknowledge and address the systemic racism that exists in our institutions.
And Annette Henry, one institutional change that the province has been working hard on is incorporating the teaching of Black history in BC school curriculum. How far will this go? We are having some technical difficulties with hearing Annette right now.
Angela, I'm going to jump in for 1 second.
Absolutely.
I just want to remind our audience that we are taking your calls tonight, and we see there's many of you logged on our Facebook pages, on YouTube and Twitter, so leave comments and questions in those comments section on those live streams. And you can, of course, always call us in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733, toll free across British Columbia, 1-800-825-5950. Leave your questions, your comments, and Angela and I will pose them to our panelists tonight.
That's right. And Annette, I understand your audio's working. We're asking you about Black history being taught in the public curriculum. How far will that go?
How far will it go? Meaning, what do you mean, how far will that go?
How far will it go in terms of addressing an institutional change that we're seeing in schools right across BC right now? We're seeing a lot of Black students come forward with concerns that they're facing anti-Black racism in schools. Will this type of curriculum address that?
That is one of many areas. So Black history is not going to change the world, but it will make a huge difference for Black children to see a reflection of themselves and to see another version, let's say, of history. Whether or not you have Black children in a classroom, all children need to understand the world from informed perspectives and not from a Eurocentric point of view. But there, along with Black history, there are so many other areas that we need to look at in terms of teachers who understand, okay, we're talking about Black children right now, but teachers who understand the students in front of them, and not assuming that children have the background or they grew up in ways that the teacher grew up, perhaps. So thinking of the curriculum, I think curriculum is powerful. Also, is it possible for students to see someone who looks like themselves in the school as an adult in a position of authority? Who's getting the work? Who's being hired? Who has access to particular jobs? All of that is part of it. So Black history is definitely important. And I think we say often, well, having Black history, yes, that's important, but it's also not just having Black history. it's the way it's taught. Yeah.
So thank you for that, Annette. And now it would be hypocritical for us to host a town hall about systemic racism if we didn't do some self-reflecting as the public broadcaster. Here's what artist Omari Newton told us about that.
My name's Omari Newton. I'm a professional artist. As a black guy, I feel like I have these like magic glasses on that a lot of white people don't have, where I see racism all the time. And I'm never surprised when I hear a high-profile person do something racist because I experience it on a regular basis. It still feels like the media covers racism as though it's a special event. You know, like when something racist happens, it's like the Super Bowl is happening. And I think the media could do a better job of just normalizing conversations and difficult, complex conversations about race so that the average Canadian doesn't see racism as an aberration. And they realize that it's a norm. We live in a system that is, you know, Canada was a country that was colonized, it's rooted in racism, and if more Canadians understood this, they wouldn't be so surprised when overt instances of racism kicked up and became national media stories.
Sergeant Spicer, we're talking about representation in institutions. Indigenous, Black, and people of color are talking about discrimination, but they're also talking about representation. The VPD has talked a lot about diversity in officers, will change the relationship between them and Indigenous people, for example. What efforts is the VPD making in order to, for example, change the position that you're in so that it is a person who is Black, Indigenous, or people of color, given that you are in a role that is reflecting diversity, inclusion, and Indigenous relations?
Yes, certainly increasing diversity within the police department is one of our major goals, and within our recruiting section, our recruiters descend into all types of communities throughout the Lower Mainland and across the province and country to do outreach, to get the largest representation of our communities. And certainly I would welcome someone of a diverse background into my position, and do hope that people feel they can come forward and take those positions, and they have in the past. So we change our positions very often within the police department, and we do have numerous people in positions of higher rank who are from diverse backgrounds. So we do encourage diversity throughout our ranks and through our recruitment practices. And so this is always a continuous effort. One of the ways that we track diversity in our police department is how many languages are spoken. And there are well over 50 languages spoken within the Vancouver Police Department. So it's a good measure or indication of the amount of diversity that exists.
Thank you. So on the topic of policing, Angela, let's go to a question on Facebook. This is from Jenny Ferguson. So she asks, can we reform a racist colonial system like the criminal justice system? Is it even possible? Or is abolishing the police what has to happen? Do we build new systems of justice? Great question. Thanks for that, Jenny.
Bo and Ma, I'm going to put that question to you. I'll repeat the question. Can we reform a racist colonial system like the criminal justice system? Is it even possible, or is abolishing the police the answer?
You know, I really appreciate that question and the opportunity to answer it. The answer, I don't know. I don't know whether or not it's enough, but I do want to acknowledge the conversations about defunding police that are taking place, not just in the States, but up here as well. And the conversation about defunding police, and I know that oftentimes when people think of defunding the police, they're thinking that we're just going to wipe police out, but it's not necessarily as simple as that. And while Canada is very different from the States and the context is very different, the policing style is also very different, it doesn't mean that we don't also have our own problems to deal with and our own problems to look at. So it brings up a lot of interesting and important questions for us here. For instance, what is the role of police institutions? What were they originally created for, and what can we reimagine them to becoming? Police officers are frontline responders that are called to attend all sorts of issues, a huge range of issues. Many of these these are situations are arguably outside of the realm for which police officers are adequately trained to take on. So something like more than 1/3 of all calls that police officers respond to involve mental health distress or illness. Even if police receive some training for situations like this, we have to question whether or not there are others who are better suited to help people in those situations. Are there different kinds of response services that are needed to handle calls that shouldn't require an armed police officer? Does a lethal weapon, like a gun, really need to be brought to a wellness check or to write somebody a ticket for speeding or failing to pay bus fare? Everybody deserves, everyone deserves to go home safely at the end of the day, including police officers who are undoubtedly often finding themselves in situations where there is real mortal danger. So the question we need to ask ourselves is whether or not there are better ways for us to keep people safe and police officers safe that don't involve killing someone else's loved one.
Bo and Ma, you brought up a really interesting point. There's a discussion happening around Canada right now about the role of police. Should police be involved in calls regarding social work, mental health, community aspects? People are talking about defunding, but saying it doesn't go far enough. Sergeant Spicer, I want to ask you this. People say it doesn't go far enough because of the way that policing was set up in Canada. It was set up as the colonial arm of the government to protect white people, to enforce colonial law and order, and to oppress Indigenous people. Some say an entire structural shift is needed, even to abolish the police. Is that needed? What do you think?
I think it's always good to review our systems, our practices, and certainly when we're dealing with the very complex issues that we have in policing, such as mental health, addiction, homelessness. These are all things that certainly other approaches could be very effective in working with us. And so I think it's always a good thing to look at other options and to see how those options would work with our current system. Certainly there's certain situations that are quite dangerous, and you have to wonder who would go to those situations and who would have the resources to actually deal with those effectively and de-escalate them and make people safe. So that there is a complexity to the concept of public safety, and certainly we're at a time now where we are looking at different ways of dealing with these complex societal issues. And this isn't the first time that within the criminal justice system there's been a call to look at these things in a different way. In fact, we have written reports on things like mental health and presenting the complexity of these issues and requesting other ways to look at these things.
All right, thank you for that, Sergeant Spicer. We've got another question from Facebook, this one from Sharon Enns. And the question is, how about defining racism so that all of us clearly understand what it is so we know how to combat it?
Annette Henry, what do you say to that?
A system of power and privilege, it operates, really when we talk about systemic racism or institutional racism, they were examples where it occurs, but it's really thinking about power and privilege in the society. And so the dominant group, white people, have the power and the privilege to do certain things that, and very often they're unconscious that other people do not have the same privileges. So I've given this example to CBC before, but the fact that I was driving a new car through the UBC property, a policeman stopped me and asked for my driver's license and registration and asked me where I was going. I wonder, would my white friends who were driving on a Sunday afternoon going out for lunch, would they be stopped when I always drive under the speed limit? I'm not a fast driver, so the amount of times that a policeman would, these are examples of racism, so it is a power issue, and the assumption that certain people are inferior and other people, certain people are inferior, people who don't look like you, people with darker skin are inferior. And this whole country was founded on that. So since Europeans came to this country, there has been racism. How they treated Indigenous people from when they first came on this land is a huge and terrifying example of that. So as you reported the other day, one of our students at UBC was racially profiled, a wonderful master's student who had his supervisor's permission to go into her office and do some work. And however, he was stopped by security. He couldn't possibly who he said he was, even though he had the credentials. He must be a thug. He's a black male on the campus. So these are the kinds of ways in which power and privilege occur. That if another master's student, a white master's student, were with a letter from her supervisor or his or their supervisor, and her card to say I'm a student at UBC, would they be stopped in the same way? So, and that was the second racial profiling that this young man has had since December. So that's an example of racism, power, privilege, whiteness.
Thank you so much, Annette. And there you're talking about carding. This is something that happens all across Canada and in Vancouver. It means people are racially profiled, pulled over, asked what they're doing. This happens often to Black, Indigenous, and people of color more often. Bowen Ma, I'm wondering, the Premier says we have a lot more work to do to make our provinces safe for people who are often the targets of oppression and hate. What further action will the provincial government take at this point?
So one of the most important actions that we took as a government when we first came into power in 2017 was to work to bring back the Human Rights Commission. For about 10 years, BC was actually the only province in Canada without a functioning Human Rights Commission. And this is incredibly important because Human Rights Commissions operate differently from human rights tribunals in that they actually address systemic racism. So we have that work, or that commission is now back in place, and they've got a lot of work ahead for them. Another extremely foundational, fundamental piece of legislation that we brought in recently that has a lot of work behind it, again, into the future, that still takes a lot of work, or rather will continue to take a lot of work in order to implement, is DRIPA, Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And it basically builds into our legislative framework a framework for decolonizing our laws. So the act establishes the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as the foundational framework for reconciliation in BC, as called for by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And this act allows and ensures, not just allows, ensures Indigenous people are a part of policymaking and decision-making processes that affect them and their families and their territories. So we're talking about a lot of work still to come in order that involves decolonizing our laws. And there are a lot of laws here in British Columbia. But it also is about helping or dealing with our child and youth care system. So for instance, in BC in 2017, Indigenous children made up nearly 2/3 of BC's children in care, despite making up less than only 10% of the overall youth population. And so actions that support former youth in care and work to end the epidemic of Indigenous children in foster care are incredibly important. We've already done some of that. The tuition-free post-secondary education that was expanded recently led to a 443% increase in former youth in care going into post-secondary education. And keep in mind that when we talk about former youth in care and youth in care, we're overwhelmingly talking about Indigenous people. So there's lots more to do. I mean, I could go on, but I know that this is a short segment. So suffice to say, there is lots that has happened and lots more to do, and we're not going to stop doing that work.
Bowen Ma, thank you so much. Valerie Spicer and Annette Henry, thank you so much. Thank you all. Professor Annette Henry is with the Faculty of Education and Social Justice Institute at UBC. She's also the David Lamb Chair in Multicultural Education. Sergeant Valerie Spencer is with the Vancouver Police Department's Diversity, Inclusion, and Indigenous Relations section. Bowen Ma is the NDP MLA for North Vancouver Lonsdale.
And we are just about to move on to the second half of our panel. Black, Indigenous, and people of color experience racism across all institutions, some that are supposed to care for and educate all Canadians. Here's what we heard from some of you about that issue.
My name is Brenda. My last name is Rosenau. I'm interracial, so I'm half Asian and half Caucasian. And throughout my life, and so I bring my person into my profession as a nurse, I've just experienced misinterpretation of behavior or communication at times. I wanted to speak to CBC about racism in healthcare because I think we need some type of cultural sensitivity education training in healthcare professions. If you look at it proportionately, if you start from the bottom and work your way to the top, when you look at upper levels of management in healthcare, you might see the more white European dominant people in management, and we need diversity all the way up the chain because we need to have discussions about how culture and race affect healthcare practice. And I just don't see that being encouraged. I don't see it being taught. And I see that there's a lot of misinterpretation sometimes of behaviors. People in the profession, they want to be promoted, right? So if you're a researcher or if you're somebody that like of color and you want a promotion, you don't want to challenge the system. So sometimes you're afraid to speak out because if you speak out, you're not seen fully as a human being speaking out. You're seen based on your color or your race.
My name is Chuka Ejekam. I'm a researcher and policy analyst in the labor movement and a research associate as well. I can recall being 20 years old and being stopped by police, held at gunpoint, put in the back of a police car, accused of a crime and questioned for an hour simply because I was walking past a building that happened to have been broken into. Racism also has psychological impacts that can be very pernicious. You know, it can influence the way someone views themselves, how they interact with themselves, their sense of self-worth, and that of course goes on to impact all of the relationships that they form in their life and the opportunities that they feel they're worthy to pursue. I think that, you know, both of these things are essential to an understanding of racism. Both of them have to be addressed. In my view, anti-racism first begins with understanding that you know, these are not just questions of opinion or perception or prejudice. These are structures of marginalization, subjugation, extraction, exploitation, and dehumanization that have been embedded in the world over a period of centuries. And thus, to be anti-racist means identifying and relentlessly assailing these structures. This will, of course, take a long time and a lot of work, but I believe it is also absolutely necessary.
My name is Beth Applewhite. I'm a vice principal in a public secondary school. I am an anti-racist educator, a biracial vice principal, and I've been working in public schools for over 25 years. Each year, a group of administrators from across different districts in the Lower Mainland, together we put on an anti-racism youth symposium, and I also put on conferences in my own district annually for Black History Month. At these anti-racism youth symposiums and Black History Month events, the students share with us their experiences, and we listen and we validate, and they make it clear that race and racism, they have to deal with it daily. I strongly feel that educators, administrators, teachers, educational assistants, we all need better training. We all need diversity and racial sensitivity training. We need to start that from the beginning with our education teacher training programs. We need to make sure our educators, through professional development, through training, start to not only accept and acknowledge that racism exists in our schools, but that it's up to them. They need to start to be comfortable enough to have these very important conversations, to deal with privilege, to talk about microaggressions, to talk about bias, inherent or otherwise. They need to be able to say racism exists and talk about it. That's the start. That's the action that we can start with.
And a reminder that we want to hear from you, so send us your questions in the comments section of our live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, or call us in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733, toll free across BC, 1-800-825-5950.
Now, we've all seen the way different businesses and governments have rushed to say they're anti-racist over the past few weeks. Everyone is saying Black Lives Matter. Many are promising to uproot systemic racism. But being part of the solution also means having to be honest about how many of them are part of the problem. Joining us now for this conversation is Parker Johnson, an organizational change specialist with Elevate Inclusion Strategies, KORY Wilson, the Executive Director of Indigenous Initiatives and Partnerships at BCIT, and Manjot Bains is a writer and former Senior Program Advisor in the Multiculturalism Program of the Department of Canadian Heritage. Welcome to the three of you. Nice to see you guys on screen. So my first question goes to KORY. So KORY, there has been this sudden increase in public displays of wokeness. We are hearing from executives all over, including here at the CBC, that we all want to do better. But leaders who want to dismantle a system that's historically privileged white people, what are some of the hard questions you think they should be asking themselves right now?
Oh, well, I think the reality is the hard questions are everything that you can think of. What is the truth? What got me to the position that I'm in? They need to look around their offices, look around their institutions or their businesses and see how many people look like them. And if they don't see others reflected, or they see everyone looking like them, then they need to ask themselves, how did I get here, and how do I let other people in? They need to look at their own personal privilege, their own how and what they do, and what the rules and the regulations and policies that they have within the institutions. They need to look at how they recognize the power that they have, and the power and how they use that power for good, and how they use that power for change. Looking at redistributing the wealth or the knowledge within the organization. It's often said that there isn't enough money to do these types of initiatives, but there's always money for certain things, as well as look at what they're doing in terms of inclusion and diversity, and if that person or people or unit or working group actually has authority and has direct access to those at the top, and has the money and the support to actually make systemic change within the institution.
Thank you so much for that, KORY. So, coming out of that, so after you've asked yourself those hard questions, like you said, how did I get here? Then, it takes courage for people to admit that, ooh, maybe I did get here, not necessarily, maybe because of my white privilege. So there's this fear that you're going to end up giving up power, that you could make mistakes. How do you encourage people to do it anyway? For you, Parker, what do you think?
Well, one of the things, at least for me, is that people have to step up with some courage and realize that they will make mistakes. And the issue with making a mistake is you want to acknowledge it, take responsibility for it, clean it up, and make sure it doesn't happen again. And oftentimes people want to spend more time managing their image rather than doing the right thing. So they want to look good rather than do good. And so people have to have that courage and know that being called racist is not the worst thing that can happen to you.
And so, Manjot, you've been through some challenging times in a job position that you've had, and you've spoken about it very publicly. A lot of organizations say they have diversity and inclusion initiatives, unconscious bias training. We've seen lots of that. How far do those actions really go to dismantling white supremacy in the workplace? And what happens when you do speak up sometimes?
I think diversity and inclusion and equity committees, they sound good on paper, but they often don't have any power. And the burden is often placed on people of color and Black and Indigenous people to run these committees. And, they make an organization look good, but a lot of time those policies aren't put into place. It's challenging because when people do speak up, and I have personal experience from this, you're reprimanded. It's dangerous to speak up in any organization. And it's, we've seen over the last couple of weeks, several people speaking out and talking about the kind of racism they've faced for years across institutions. It's endemic, in the tech industry, media, private, public sector. And it's dangerous to speak up. It's dangerous to talk about and call out racism, because sometimes then you're no longer up for promotion. People exclude you from team meetings and et cetera. So it's really challenging for people to be in a space like that.
Absolutely.
Let's turn to our audience right now. We're gonna take a comment from Facebook. The comment is coming from Nishadi. What is being done to address the lack of recognition of foreign credentials? There are many highly skilled immigrants, especially healthcare workers, without relevant, appropriate jobs because of this issue.
All right, that question, why don't we ask to you, KORY? What do you think?
Well, I think at BCIT and other post-secondary institutions as well. I mean, I know at our team we've been working really hard. Our international team, as well as our innovative, creative teaching and learning team, are really looking at micro-credentials, looking at how we are innovative, how we recognize prior learning, looking to build systems and programming and structures that make it much easier and for people to be recognized, to recognize those foreign credentials and allow them to quickly get to the job market, particularly in areas where we need these people. We did a very successful program transitioning former veterans into new jobs, and I know our team, led by a man named Kevin Wainwright, is working exceptionally hard to look at how, particularly in this time, how we transition that and make it easier, more accessible, and not quite as expensive to get people into the jobs, particularly in healthcare, where we need them.
Thank you for that. Parker, I want to go to you with this next question. You know, a lot of organizations now are expressing solidarity with Black people. We've seen, you know, I think take over all of our Instagrams over the last couple of days and weeks, these Black squares. Everybody is saying Black Lives Matter. And now these businesses, though, some of them are facing backlash because they're being called out for performative gestures. What are they not understanding about what it takes and what it means to stand with people of color?
Well, I think first and foremost, as was mentioned earlier by KORY, people need to look at themselves and their values, their beliefs, their practices within their organization so that they aren't called out on those things. The other thing is for them to really take a stand in a way that's meaningful from where they are. What are the things that they can do in the moment right now, both in terms of transformation of their organizations, their practices, their hiring, and so on and so forth. But just to make these statements without any substance behind them, people will call folks out. And so a really clear self-assessment of where are we and where do we need to go, and starting from there, not to do some performative gesture which really reveals that you don't have any understanding of actually what's going on. You may or may not have any connection with Black people, and trotting out individuals or trotting out statements that have no substance. People oftentimes know that, and when they're trying to do the right thing, they actually have to have some weight behind it. And I know a few organizations that have been called out on that, and others have been slower to come forward, which has been good. Black people, this is not a flavor of the moment, so folks need to take stock and actually really look at where they are. And not everybody has to come out with a statement immediately. Take your time, do it right.
That's good advice. Take your time and do some internal reflection, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to something that Manjot had talked about being reprimanded when people of color do speak out. And what we've seen with so many of these companies are former employees coming back to voice their concern because they felt like they didn't have that safe space. So Manjot, question for you, you know, what's your suggestion about how we make workplaces a truly safe and inclusive space?
You know, I don't know if I have a response for that. There needs to be a real transformative change within organizations to make safe spaces. And that doesn't just mean having representation. That's one piece of it, having representation at all levels, particularly at upper levels in an organization. But, you know, things like training is not enough. The challenge is that the institutions are often, they uphold white supremacy. They are systemic with racism. And so you can implement, unconscious bias training or other types of training in a workplace, but it won't actually fix the problem. It's so much deeper. And I think, you know, the VPD is a really great example of this. They've been talking about the diversity and their diversity hires and, putting up pictures of the diversity within their ranks. But if the institution and the system is racist, it doesn't matter how many people of color or you bring in as model minority hires. It's not going to change things if Black and Indigenous people are still being attacked.
That's a really great point. And then you get into this idea of tokenism, and that's problematic as well, right? Thank you, Manjot. And I believe we actually have a call, Angela, right?
We do. Gobinder is on the line from Vancouver. Gobinder, go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me. I do diversity and cultural sensitivity training, and just before I talk about that briefly, much of my background has been involved in the media. I used to be a reporter for CBC briefly. When I was in the private market, I would go on the air, and the switchboard would light up, and they would say, "Take that Hindu off the air." And I'm thinking, you people can't even get the right religion. And for many years, I called myself Tony Gill. Now I do public speaking and I do diversity training. I think a lot of the organizations, they want to do diversity and cultural sensitivity training, and they talk about it, but they do not necessarily take action because they don't view it as investment. And I think the only time when organizations really take seriously when litigation is beginning to take place.
That's a great question.
That's a really great question. It's a great comment. I put that to you, Parker, about, we've talked about how many organizations don't necessarily take it seriously. They don't take these programs seriously.
Yes, and I think that's because oftentimes they look at them as programs rather than institutional and cultural change. They really do need to take stock of how they got to where they are and actually have some vision as to where they want to go and how they're going to get there. And oftentimes people pass up the issue around what's your theory of change process? Where are you and what are the various things you need to look at? And oftentimes people want to do sensitivity training. I rather look at it as accountability training. I don't really care about how sensitive you are, but people need to be accountable. People need to have some vision as to where they want to go. And it needs to be leadership from the top, and they need to look at their values, their vision, their mission, and integrate it throughout their entire system. It can't be a situation where they're looking to have people assimilate into a structure which is not designed for them. And that actually creates not only tokenism, but it also creates resentment and ends up being that people are neither promoted nor retained and are inappropriately recruited. And so you can't plant a seed in hard ground. And institutions really need to closely look at how do we get here? In the same way that when you look at police forces and fire departments, when they decided that they were going to hire women and they decided they were going to hire people of color and they found out that they had a revolving door or women would come in and men would talk to them and say, I don't think of you as a woman, I think of you as one of us. So again, it needs to be a culture shift. It needs to be a shift in terms of how people actually see themselves and the work that they do and who they work for.
Thank you so much for that, Parker. And speaking of systems not made for you, we heard from one of our audience members. She reached out to us before this town hall. Her name's Shagufta Pasta, and she's a researcher, a Muslim woman, talking about her experience in her 20s looking for a job. Take a listen.
Hi, my name is Shagufta Pasta, and I'm a writer and researcher thinking about how to make the future of work more equitable. So I'm a visibly Muslim woman with a headscarf, and in my early 20s and mid-20s and even late 20s, that was something that I was always navigating. There was never other people in the workplace who looked like me. People always had a certain conception of what they thought a Muslim woman might achieve, might speak like, might think about, and I was constantly navigating that. If you go to the library and look up career books because you're trying to figure out how to figure out your career path, you will see books by and large written by white men. And a lot of those books will say, just network, just find people who are doing the things you want to do, talk to them, and design the career that you want to have. And those rules don't apply equally to everyone because not everyone has social capital and not everyone is long established in the city. And how we are read by the workplace is not just of our own making. The workplace is also reading us, and our resume is landing in a place where people are reading our last names, they are meeting us in interviews and reading our bodies in particular ways. There is a culture that we may or may not fit in, depending on how people assess us. And so this idea that if you just dream it, and you can do it, and if you're not doing it, it's because your dream wasn't big enough. That is a rule that applies, I think, for some people, and that has been some people's career experience, and that is why it's so largely reflected in the literature. But it is not everyone's career experience.
So your career, it's not always if you just dream it and it can happen. And KORY, I saw you nodding away during that video. I have a feeling you may have heard some of similar experience like that in your work at BCIT. So, you know, what do you tell your students?
Well, I think the reality is that there are so many variables that can help or lead to a student or a person becoming successful and being able to follow and live their dream. It has to be acknowledged that there is a weight that those of us that are Black, Indigenous, people of color carry that other people do not carry, that almost hold us down or make it harder for us to succeed and achieve that dream. It's also important to remember that there must be mentoring, and we hear a lot about mentoring, but mentoring is a two-part process. It's mentoring, identifying and supporting, but it's also advocating, because as was mentioned in the piece, social capital, we don't have that as Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so getting into places and spaces are things that we have to do. And there's still many places and spaces in this province, in this country, in this world that we are not in. So we can't have an influence. We can't dream for that place, or if we do, it's a much heavier, weightier path to get there. And a suggestion for that I really work hard and strive for is that companies can't wait for BCIT or other institutions to provide them with Indigenous scholars or graduates in finance or graduates in X program. You need to help us and help the school system, help the kids in care that are in British Columbia, as we saw, over 2/3 of them are Indigenous. How do we help those kids stay in school and realize in grade 8 that math is important and that you should strive to take math 12 or whatever it is that they need, or if they need tutoring. So the solutions or challenges to racism, to overcome systemic discrimination, are vast, but it's going to take all of us to work not only within the places and spaces that we occupy, but we must leverage and work together with others to ensure that the path for people, like the woman that was just mentioned, I apologize, I forgot her name, that the path is not hard or full of those extra barriers. We've got to remove the weight from all of our shoulders, clear the path, and allow a smooth transition to whatever it is we want to dream, and others have to make space for that, and engage in authentic, genuine dialogue that allows that to happen, and ensure that we will all be better for it. I've been known to say many times, if my children don't succeed, your children are not going to succeed either. So we have to work on this together, and we have to figure out a way together to leverage our resources, redistribute the wealth and power, and ensure that everyone has a chance to dream.
It's so important, as you say, to make space for other people, especially those of us in leadership positions, right? And Manjot, I know you had quite the reaction also while listening to Shagufta talk. You know, for me, what really resonated, her talking about having an ethnic name. I do as well myself. If you were to look at the spelling, you'd probably, most people don't pronounce it correctly. But Manjot, what resonated for you when you were listening to Shagufta talk there?
I mean, so many things, I think. I mean, just the thing around names. I remember one of my first co-op jobs as a university student, I was asked if they could call me Manny instead of Manjot. And I was young and I didn't know what to say. And I said, okay. And I hated it. I cringed for 8 months. And then, once I left, I was like, I'm never letting anyone do that to me again. Learn to say my name. That isn't hard. The other thing about what she was saying around being able to dream, if you don't have access, for me, I'm like, I don't think that's an option. Like, when I think about my nephew who's in elementary school, he can dream all he wants, but he's going to hit a barrier once he gets to a certain point, because the people at the top, executive directors, CEOs, etc., who are primarily white, they don't want to give up their positions of power. So there's a cap at your dreams. I don't think that it's I don't know if it can be an equal playing field the way the system is set up right now in any space, whether it's creative or tech or whatnot.
Right, and speaking about, the role of white leadership, Ange, I think we've got another question from Facebook, right?
We do. We have a question from Natasha from Facebook. The comment is, how can organizations led by white leadership address racism when they experience white fragility when called out?
All right, I think I'm going to take that one over to you, Parker, because you do a lot of business training. So what happens when someone calls out white fragility and, bosses might not be happy about it?
Yes, and I've worked with a number of folks in coaching contexts where that has happened. And really what I really always encourage them to do is to stay the course, because we're not there to grab the cookies. You're there to do the right thing. And so oftentimes people will say, you need to toughen up. And what I like to encourage folks to do is to really expand and open up and be more compassionate, both with themselves and others. And to be able to hear hard criticism, have some strategies around that, to be able to take a breath, take a moment. And when someone gives you that feedback, to say, thank you, I was unaware of that. This is something that I need to work on, and I am working on it, and to actually do the work. Because oftentimes people do performative gestures because they want to get accolades or they want to look good. And as I said before, it's not about looking good, it's about doing good. And if we're actually going to look at redistribution of wealth and power and trying to create workplaces that are equitable, inclusive, welcoming, and just, then we have to do that work. And for those who have power, they need to know how to share power. They need to have humility, as well as, and in having that humility, they'll increase their humanity.
Your humility will increase your humanity. That is a really great point. And, also adding to that, of course, KORY, your point of saying, ask yourself how did you get here, right? And tackling some of those hard truths and creating space for other people. All right, with that, we're going to wrap up this part of the panel. Thank you so much to the three of you, Parker, KORY, Manjot. Thank you for joining us. And that was Parker Johnson with Elevate Inclusion Strategies, KORY Wilson with Indigenous Initiatives and Partnerships over at BCIT, and writer Manjot Bains.
Well, we've heard about systemic racism and racism in our workplaces, but what about how it affects us in our daily lives? Here are two of our CBC journalists, both Indigenous, with their stories. And a warning, this video contains strong language some might find disturbing.
Hi, my name is Gordon Lovren. I'm a Tlingit Tahltan person. I come from the Wolf Clan, and my Indigenous name is Yonatan. My most recent experience with overt racism was 6 months ago. I was going to a coffee shop to get some coffee, and I was in a lineup, and I was the only Indigenous person in the lineup. The rest were all white people getting their coffee. And a young non-Indigenous white guy behind the counter looked at me and went, "Phew." And I was stunned. I thought, for a moment, to give him the benefit of the doubt, I thought, because there's big windows behind me, I thought maybe one of his buddies was in the window and he was just goofing around with him. So I turned and I looked, and there was nobody there. And it just made my blood boil, and I looked back at him, and he just smiled and shook his head like, yes. And everybody in the lineup saw it, but nobody did anything. And I couldn't contain my rage, but I had to, because I was the only Indigenous person there. And if I started a scene, I knew instinctually that the cops would be called, and I would be the one taken away, and I would be the one that was the problem, not the guy who had literally looked at me and shot at me with his phantom gun.
Hi, my name is Wamish Hamilton. I'm from the Hupachishit First Nation on Vancouver Island, one of 14 Nuchana tribes. When I was 14, I'd been going to a new middle school, and I got into a physical altercation, a fist fight, with another kid in school, a non-Indigenous kid. And we were duking it out, and I was getting the better of this kid. And then suddenly, I was grabbed from behind. I was lifted up in the air and flipped over like a bag of potatoes onto the ground. And then I was picked up again by the shoulders of my shirt and yarded up, and I could see a big set of adult hands. They were man's hands. Picked me up and threw me down again. Now, I don't know if I could say this on TV, and I'm sure you'll blurt it out, but each time he did that, And after the second time he threw me on the ground, he was kicking me. And each time he did that, he called me a f***ing savage. You f***ing savage. You f***ing savage. You f***ing savage. Get out of here, you f***ing savage. I was 14 years old. And that was a grown man who knew what he was doing and was hateful. I remember every detail of that. I remember what that day looked like. I remember what that day sounded like. I can still see houses, people, kids, this pathway down to our church. I can hear things, and I could hear him. I could still feel his hands when I talk about it.
Big thank you to Gordon and Wamish for sharing those stories. Both of them actually are journalists that work with us here at CBC in Vancouver. And we want to hear also your questions and comments. So a reminder to send them to us. You can leave comments in the live stream section of our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, or you can call us in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733, toll free across BC at 1-800-825-5950.
Well, the responsibility of acting against white supremacy and systemic racism doesn't just lie with corporations and executives. Each and every one of us have to carry the mantle. These are not just one-off isolated incidents, but daily occurrences. Well, how do we put a stop to it? Joining me now for this conversation is Jessica Slater, Indigenous Social Innovation Coordinator with Skookum Lab. Jamira Lovemore-White is the co-founder of Black Mutual Aid BC. She's also an organizer with Black Lives Matter. And Adrian Smith is a lawyer and trans human rights activist. Welcome to you all. And it looks like we're having some technical difficulties here. Well,
my guess is we will get them on screen.
All right, well,
very soon.
we are waiting to get them on screen, but Jessica's back.
Oh, there we are.
And hello to you all, first of all. Thank you so much for being with us. Jessica, I want to ask you, first of all, your organization recently held an event to discuss the ways Indigenous people living in Surrey experience racism every day. Tell me about some of those examples of day-to-day experiences.
Sure. Hi, Angela. So I'm the Indigenous Social Innovation Coordinator for Skookum Lab. It's a 3-year social innovation project that is looking at the systemic causes for Indigenous child and youth poverty in the region. And when we were doing our initial research, it was pretty astounding at how much of the stories emerged about the system keeping poverty in place was really linked to discrimination and racism that was embedded in the system. And we're talking about every sector of the system, whether it was healthcare, social services, or education, justice. And so we decided to apply for some funding to do a bit of a deeper dive into this. And we held a 2-day forum on Indigenous systemic racism in Surrey, and we just released our report. So we're really proud to share that. But some of the stories that we heard at that event were really about, people not wanting to bring their kids to the hospital for fear that, a child injuring themselves will be perceived as a neglect or harm case, and MCFD will be called. The ministry was brought up a lot, actually, and in the fear that exists in a lot of families. And, just stories that this happens every single day in our culture, and it's not going away. And so we're really proud to be continuing with this work and really proud to share that report.
And Jessica, in that report, you talk about something called racism resistance. How do you direct Indigenous youth to combat racism?
In my previous role, I was a social enterprise coordinator for the Fraser Region Aboriginal Friendship Center, and they have a program that trains Indigenous youth in informed care to be consultants and be experts in their own lived history instead of bringing in non-Indigenous consultants to study, our people, our community in this very extractive manner. And we developed a program with Dr. Cynthia Sturby's called Decolonize 101, and it was basically around racism resistance. So we know that this exists in our community, and what are some strategies that Indigenous folks and people of color can employ to resist the racism that they endure every day.
And Jamira, I want to bring you into this conversation. I know you've spoken in the past about many people thinking of racism as a thing of the past. For example, people think about segregation, for example, in many cities up until the 60s. But we know racism is alive and well today, but it's often hidden from those people who don't experience it, at least. How does your day-to-day experience as a Black person confront that notion that racism doesn't exist or that it's rare in Canada?
The invisible racism that folks, or that I encounter and that a lot of Black folks counter on a regular basis actually often happens in what you would think would be safe spaces. So sometimes it's with friends or at a workplace with colleagues, people expecting certain things of you because they think they understand parts of Black culture, and then attributing that to you because you're Black. Badgering to be able to use certain words that are incredibly offensive. Microaggressions such as touching your hair unnecessarily. And a lot of people have not really done the work to deal with their own implicit biases. And so these things are part of the larger amount of actions that can contribute to everyday racism that a lot of Black people feel.
And Adrian, I see you nodding your head a lot throughout this conversation. How do you describe the way that you navigate the world in a very different way as a white person?
Well, I'd like to begin by acknowledging my complicity in a system of white supremacy that is real. It is part of the social fabric of the Canadian nation state, and it is everywhere in the world. And for white people, it's like sunlight in the way that we don't even see that it is happening, and it benefits us. And because we are the benefactors of an unjust system that's literally killing people, it's our job to intervene in that and to dismantle the system.
I think we may go to a phone call.
I think this one might tie into... Oh, our phone caller is not quite on right now, but we do have a question from YouTube. We've seen moments like this from before, yet the answer has always been institutions and police need more training with no results. What radical changes to systems should we seek to address this issue? And this is from Charles from YouTube.
Jessica, I'm going to put that question to you. We've seen a lot of discussions in Canada right now about Indigenous people's relationship with the police. What are your thoughts about this question?
I'm really proud to be a part of Skookum Lab because we're one of the first Indigenous-led social innovation labs in North America, and we're taking a systems approach to looking at this issue. And so what we're seeing is that training is simply not enough. I was so happy to hear your previous guests talk about transformative and systemic change. And, you know, the Terry Cross model was developed in the 80s. It still stands up today. It's a continuum of cultural safety. And it says, you know, that lower 10% that's on the bottom rung of that ladder are so harmful and are so biased and violent that we simply need to stop them from infecting the rest of the culture. And so I don't know how we can impact systems by doing like bias assessment, but definitely what comes to mind is what the previous speaker spoke about with the embedding accountability systems in every step of the way, in every sector, you know, and not allowing people that have such harsh implicit bias to have access to people of color and Indigenous people.
And that was a really powerful point I think Parker made in the last panel, was we need to talk about accountability rather than training. We are going to go to the phone lines now.
We do. We've got a question from Catherine in Vancouver, and she has a biracial son, and you've got a great question for our panelists. Catherine, go ahead.
Okay. Do you hear me?
We do.
Okay, so I got a lot of questions, but how do I put this? I want to know what I can do. I'm raising a son who's part European extract on my side and Salvadorian, Central American. And I believe I raised him to really be a leader in fighting racism. But he has turned his back on me completely for the last 6 months because I don't have the proper language. I believe I know what he maybe has gone through in his my bringing him up as a single parent in Vancouver, Kitsilano. There was racism, lots of racism, but we haven't talked about it, and it's just been a really hard dialogue. So I'm reading all these books, but he still says I'm being performative. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what to do. So how can I help him and our relationship, which is non-existent right now?
Thanks for calling in with that, Catherine. That's a great question.
It is a great question. And Jamira, I want to hear your perspective on this.
Okay, so thank you for asking this question, because it is a really important one. I think the first thing you're going to have to do is to realize that this is an ongoing process. This is not something that you're going to be able to solve overnight. This is not something that you're going to learn everything about overnight. And I commend you for starting to do the reading. The work is a lot, and you're going to keep uncovering pieces of history that you didn't know, and things about yourself as well. But again, this is an ongoing unlearning, and you're going to have to really commit to that. At a certain point, you'll realize that this is not you trying to help him. This is something that has to be done to actually build this better world that is one where he does not have to face racism. And so, again, continue with the learning, continue with what you're doing right now, and then really try to get to that point where you're seeing that this is not his struggle that you're helping him with. This is something that you need to do as well. All of this learning, like I said, it is quite a lot, but it's really important to get to the point where you see that this is something we have to get to together.
And as we're talking about navigating as a person of color, we've got a video from Tessa Russell. She's from Kelowna, and she talks about what it's like being a Black woman in Canada.
Hello, my name is Tessa Russell, and I live in Kelowna, BC. Having lived in both the US and Canada, my awareness of racism in Canada has been that it tends to be way more insidious and, in some sense, then dangerous because it's unacknowledged and tacitly acceptable. I've had to show multiple forms of identification when returning items to a store that I have a receipt for, if it's in a large amount of money for the refund. It's things like people walking in front of you when you're in a lineup and then saying, "Oh, I didn't see you there," literally whitewashing you into invisibility. And, you know, even though it's wrapped in this really polite Canadian bow, it still makes you wonder. They question you with things like, "Where are you from?" as if somehow you couldn't be from Canada. Or the way that they walk up to my 3 children who happen to be biracial and they want to touch their hair, and they have questions about them as if they are zoo specimens or pets, and I've had to teach them not to let people touch their hair. So those are the sorts of things that you experience as a Black person in Canada, and that's just one short example of the many ways that you are made to feel that whether we say the word or not, that you are. And there are hundreds of ways that we can say this without actually saying it. What I would like to see is for Black people's contributions to Canada to be acknowledged in a way that's meaningful outside of our history of slavery.
And that was Tessa Russell sharing her experience dealing with racism as a Black woman in Kelowna. Adrian, we are talking a lot right now about learning. We've seen a lot of people across Canada talking about this learning, this journey, this self-reflecting, and a lot of white people are being told to educate themselves about their privileges, about their bias. They're being told they perpetuate racial inequality by benefiting, like you said earlier, from the status quo, and they need to solve racism rather than having people of color doing the work for them. Yet a lot of white people might be offended hearing that about themselves. How do you stop yourself from getting defensive and instead stay committed to listening to these voices?
White tears aren't going to change anything, and the responsibility that white people have to put aside their discomfort at a time and a place when other people are actually being killed by a system that we're doing nothing about. I think if you need to take a breath and realize that you actually do live in a racist state and you're part of the problem unless you're working to solve it, then take that breath. don't expect people of color to take care of you because you're benefiting for the system. And when you've had some time to think about the implications of your actions, make a conscious decision to change, to do the reading and to behave in a way so that people of color will notice. Don't just read the books and think you're good. You have to write to say, let's take down that statue of Gassy Jack. Let's not have VPD officers on a panel about racism. Let's stop this tokenizing that happens in all of these corporate sectors, and let's make some meaningful change. And the leadership from that change is going to come from Black, Indigenous, mixed race, people of color. White people aren't going to lead it, but we need to put our bodies in the way when there's violence and microaggressions and the kind of things that Shagufta and Chuka were talking about. When that hijabi teenager was sexually assaulted on the SkyTrain, no one helped her, and there were white people there.
Really important, powerful words about allyship. And I believe we do have a Facebook comment coming our way.
Yeah, we do. You know, to the idea of talking about white supremacy and saying that we're all complicit, you know, how do you respond to those that say, quote, I can't be racist, I'm brown/black/Asian? How do you respond to those? And that's from Michael Tan from Facebook.
Jessica, I'm going to put that question to you. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think racism exists. I think really the only time that someone can say that, you know, like I was reading the comments earlier on this post, and there was a lot of white people saying, well, there's a lot of racism against white people, and why aren't we talking about that? And people need to understand that racism against white people doesn't exist. Because there's no power indifference, there's no structural colonial roots, you know, that have privileged you for thousands of years. But we do work in Surrey, and Surrey has such an incredibly diverse population, so many newcomers and refugees, and we've worked with them in solidarity in the Indigenous community. And one thing that they've reported is that they immediately embed bias against Indigenous people upon arrival to Canada. And so that right there really spoke to how systemic this issue is. If this bias is woven through the fabric of Canadian society and is so easily embedded by people that are just coming here for the first time, that's a real issue and that's a real problem.
And when we're speaking about how people can be good allies, I want to ask you, Jamira, if people truly want to be empathetic, be good allies to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, what are ways they can check themselves and practice dismantling white supremacy every day?
I think that people who want to be good allies really need to self-assess and really address their own biases, where they come from, and then actively begin to call out racism when they see it, when it's happening in their workplace, within their friend groups, at home with their families. These are the really important things that we need to actually move the needle forward. Often we have these conversations every couple of years, we talk about racism, and then it gets sidelined by performative allyship and white guilt. So to move past that, people need to be able to sit with their discomfort, understand that it's uncomfortable because it's bad, and then choose, I don't want this feeling again. I'm going to do something better next time. I'm going to do something right now. I'm going to say something in this moment so that people around me know that I don't stand for this.
And on that note of allyship, we have a video clip from Maureen Powers, and she wanted to share a bit of her experience.
My name is Chuka Ejekam. I'm a researcher and policy analyst in the labor movement and a research associate as well. I can recall being 20 years old and being stopped by police, held at gunpoint, put in the back of a police car, accused of a crime and questioned for an hour. So
we don't have the right tape there. We can show Maureen's clip in a moment. Ange, did we want to get to another question?
Yeah, I mean, we are speaking a lot about allyship, confronting privilege, speaking about racism and being extremely uncomfortable, as you said, Jamira. In the end, what is going to stop people from understanding they're benefiting from the status quo? Adrian?
Well, I think people get defensive when they hear about white privilege because it implies for them that they don't have any problems. I have lots of problems, but the color of my skin is not one of them. And there is a way for us to build solidarity with people who are different from us. And for white people who are used to identifying as feminists, think of all the times that you've called out sexism in your life and what a positive impact you made by saying that thing that's happening right now, that's unacceptable. Move that over into another environment that you know less about. Do some deep, deep reading and some good thinking about how to call out racism and to admit that you have a role in it. White is a race. We have the outlandishness to say that we don't see it because the system is designed to hide it from us, and you need to dig to see it.
Thank you so much for that, Jessica. And it turns out we now do have that clip from Maureen, so we're going to hear from her now.
My first name is Maureen, and my last name is Powers. I come from a middle-class environment. I had a mom as a nurse who worked with all kinds of, people who were in dire need, and my dad worked a couple of jobs. So I'm not from a privileged, high-end white community. I rubbed shoulders with every kind of person in my early years. In my experience, only it's been a white person who's trying to confront a child, a person of a different culture, or speaking a different language, and making jokes or making remarks. So, yeah, it was, as a white person, it was usually a white person making those comments, and I would stand up to them, and they would, for the most part, usually go silent because they were waiting for me to either quietly walk away or just to kind of stand there and not say anything. So when I confronted them and apparently showed to them that I was not on their side, they would usually walk away or make some nasty remark to me. But I felt good doing that. I felt like that person who was being victimized was supported. And that's what they need to feel. They need to feel supported, that not every white person is going to feel that way. And I only hope that more white people will stand up when they see that together and have their voice sound. And then that will undermine a lot of these bullies and their, public bullies and racists.
Mira, I want to ask you what you thought of that clip, but also how common it is to hear that sentiment from a white person.
Oh, sorry, okay. It's really good to hear that she took the time to actually call out that. I don't actually hear that a lot. Often people don't really tell me about the times that they didn't stand up to racism. But I know that Canadian politeness tends to allow us to just shrug things off or laugh it away. It made me feel good to hear her say that she used her privilege and it made her feel good, because that's something that we can all do, in a lot of ways. A lot of us do wield privilege, and to use it to empower others is incredibly powerful. It's very useful, and it's how we move the needle. So I was happy to hear her say that.
Thank you for that. Let's head to a comment now. We've got a comment from Herbert from New Ianch.
Yeah, so Herbert's actually calling in. So Herbert, go ahead with your comment.
Thank you. This is, I just wanted to share that racism isn't just the white man's perspective, doings. When I was a child living in Gidachtamich, one of the elders stopped me on my way home from school and said, "Come Kiwanin, you are a white person because of the color of my skin." Stop wagging. He said, your brother, one of your brothers is a half-breed. And your youngest brother is an indigenous person. I don't know whether he was talking about my mother or whether he meant to shame me. And then in Langley, when I was going to school there, back in 1960, we were getting ready for a rugby game, English rugby game. We were going to play in Abbotsford, and one of my teammates said, "If there's anything I hate more than a wagon burner, is a wetback." He's my teammate. the other thing that I really wanted to say was, if we're going to be dealing with systemic issues, all the commissions, everything that's been going on in Canada, the federal government always puts our issues on the back burner for funding, and we never get it up front. That's why we still have water issues, we still have housing issues, molding issues, all of these kinds of things that we've experienced over these years. And nobody is saying, like, racism hurts, it's a killer. And so even amongst our own people, our very own people, we have racism.
Thank you so much for that call, Herbert. Jessica, I wanted to ask you this as well earlier. He used the word gamshawa there. In the Nishka language, in our language, we say amshawa. That means a white person. And there's discrimination in our own, among our own people, not just for being light-skinned, but internal racism as well, that he was talking about there. One of his teammates had called him a racial slur. Tell me about how you go about talking about that to the youth in your programs. How do you begin to address something that is so thorny?
Yeah, well, I think I just start with my own journey and my identity reclamation as a white passing Indigenous person, and the incredible privilege that offers me. And I walk through the world in a very different way than a lot of my relatives do, and a lot of the youth that I work with. So positioning myself in my privilege is like where I start from. But then really honoring each and every youth's journey is different. And we work in what we call a culturally intersectional approach in our work in Surrey, because we ground the work in the protocols of the land-based nations, but we also want to be really careful to honor the ancestry of the diverse Indigenous peoples there. And we come to the work with so many different journeys and so many different pathways there and so many different experiences. And, I hear about stories too about internalized racism, like unpacking the shame and guilt that we carry that have colonial roots. And that was really a part of my healing journey, was finding out that shame and guilt that I carried wasn't mine, that largely in part it was systemic. And so doing the work to unpack how our systems were built can be incredibly healing for our Indigenous community. And then allowing a safe container for that work to take place, and then, safe containers for community to come together and heal and be in community is really important. And I don't think there's enough priority given to creating those spaces and creating those moments where we can do our own healing on our own terms.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I want to get some final remarks from you, Jamira and Adrian. What needs to happen at this point in time within the communities that you represent, that you're embedded in order to see systemic, everyday racism addressed in a way that's going to be conducive to the transformation that we're maybe not seeing at this point in time?
I would say one of the first things that has to happen to really get this conversation going in the right place is going to be to actually unpack history and look at it without this kind of rosy white lens. There's a lot of our history that we don't know. There's a lot of our history that's been hidden from us, and we're only really taught a couple things, especially when it comes to Black history. And so that's going to be a pretty important piece. It needs to come from everyday people. Learning and reading has to come from the media, telling real Black stories, Black histories that aren't just embedded with white saviors, but with Black joy as well. And then it also needs to come from everyone in their workplaces, just choosing to listen to Black people, choosing to listen to Indigenous people when they tell you some harm is happening, and then acting accordingly to fix that problem.
Adrian, final thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with Jamira entirely. Believe people when they tell you that the system is killing them. I'm a trans activist, and it was really important to me to stop and listen to Black, queer, and trans people in my community saying police at the Pride Parade made them unsafe. And I supported that call. And I think we're hearing now calls to defund police services across the country. And that's something we need to pay attention to. We don't solve racism by giving more money to police. We don't solve crime by locking people up.
Thank you so much to all of you. Jessica Slater is an Indigenous social innovator, coordinator with Skookum Lab. Jamira Love-Moore-White is the co-founder of Black Mutual Aid in BC. She's also an organizer with Black Lives Matter. And Adrian Smith is a lawyer and trans human rights advocate.
And with that, that brings to a close our panel for today. Thank you to each and every one of our panelists and our audience for sharing their insight and speaking so candidly. We recognize this was a tough conversation to have and the risks involved with speaking out against racism.
And the conversation does not stop here. We at the CBC acknowledge our role in perpetuating systemic racism, and we are committed to doing better within the corporation and in our coverage. Tonight's event was closed caption. There will be a version that includes ASL that will be available on GEM.